The first thing people remember about that morning in Copper Ridge Desert wasn't the heat. It was the silence. That kind of stillness only exists in the middle of the Nevada Badlands, where even the wind seems to hold its breath. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, but the heat was already building in a way that made every breath feel thick. It was the kind of morning that didn't look like it should bring trouble. But trouble was already buried in the dirt. More than 30 volunteers and local officers were spread across a stretch of land just outside Sage Valley, forming uneven lines as they pushed deeper into the desert. Most of them had never met the young woman they were searching for, but they knew her name. It had been repeated enough times over police radios and neighborhood groups that it began to feel personal. Lydia Monroe, 26 years old, missing for 6 days. People searched because Sage Valley wasn't the kind of town used to disappearances. Tourists went missing in the mountains sometimes. Hikers turned up lost or dehydrated. But young women with steady jobs and stable lives didn't just vanish from a place like this. Not without the entire community noticing. And that was why, even before sunrise, people left their homes, grabbed water bottles and hats, and came out to help. One of those volunteers was Avery Collins, a soft-spoken woman in her mid-20s who worked at the public library. She wasn't a trained searcher. She didn't know how to track footprints or analyze crime scenes. But she cared. And sometimes in small towns, caring is enough to put you out under a rising sun, walking through dust and thorn bushes for a person you've never met. Avery had been assigned to a section near an old desert tree, a twisted, half-dead cottonwood that somehow managed to survive in the middle of the red dirt. The tree stood alone, like it was holding the weight of the land on its shoulders. She had seen it earlier in the week from the side of the road, but today it felt different, heavier, like the ground beneath it knew something the rest of them didn't. She approached the tree slowly, tapping the sand with the metal search rod she'd been given. Each tap made a hollow thump, dull and lifeless. She moved in a slow circle, watching the ground, letting her instincts guide her more than any training could have. She paused when she saw it, a small mound of grass and brittle branches piled strangely around the base of the tree. The desert didn't make piles like that on its own. Someone had placed it there. Avery crouched down, brushing her hand across the top of the mound. The branches were too fresh compared to the surrounding brush, dry but not sun-faded, as if someone had gathered them recently, hurriedly, without much thought except to cover something up. She didn't smell it right away, not with the dry air and the dust, but when she pressed the tip of her rod into the pile, the ground shifted, and with it came an odor, thick, sour, unmistakable. A smell she had only ever encountered once before in her life, when a neighbor's dog had found a deer carcass in the woods behind her childhood home. It was the smell of decay. Her breath caught in her chest. She tapped again, firmer this time, and the rod clinked against something that was not stone, not wood, something soft and yet resistant. A feeling she didn't want to think about too deeply. "Over here!" Avery called, her voice cracking. The closest officer jogged toward her, followed by 2 other volunteers. Avery backed away from the tree as they began removing the branches piece by piece, the smell growing stronger with every handful. Someone gagged. Someone else muttered a curse under their breath. When the last layer of branches was pulled aside, a black plastic bag came into view, large, thick, knotted at the top. The officer hesitated. Bags like that rarely contained anything good. He slipped on gloves, ripped the knot open, and peeled the plastic back. Everyone stopped moving. Inside, the bag was a body, pale, still, unmistakably human. The desert heat had already begun its cruel work. Skin marbled, features distorted, fingerprints eroded to almost nothing. But even before identification, no one needed to ask who it was. It was Lydia Monroe. For 6 days, people had whispered theories. Maybe she'd run away. Maybe she'd gotten lost. Maybe she'd had an accident. For 6 days, Cole Harrison, her boyfriend, hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time, staring at the door as if she might walk through it. For 6 days, her father had flown back and forth from Ohio, begging officers for news. And now there was only this, a young woman hidden beneath a tree in the middle of nowhere, wrapped like something disposable. The officers radioed for detectives immediately, marking off the area with yellow tape that flickered in the desert wind. A drone was launched to photograph the scene. Volunteers were asked to step back. Avery stood silently near one of the cruisers, staring at the ground. Her hands were shaking. Detective Miriam Keene, a woman known for her calm under pressure, arrived on scene within minutes. She was tall, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who could walk into any room and instantly know who was lying. She approached the bag carefully, taking in the details, the positioning, the soil disturbance, the branches placed to hide it. Nothing about the scene suggested randomness. It felt planned, deliberate, cold. "Time of burial looks recent," she said quietly to the crime scene tech beside her. "Maybe 3-4 days. Whoever did this tried to cover their tracks. But they weren't professionals." While the techs began documenting the area, Detective Keene turned toward Avery. "You found her?" she asked gently. Avery nodded, tears welling, but not falling. I didn't know what I saw at first. I just felt something was wrong." "You did the right thing," the detective said. "You gave her family an answer. But of course, answers are never enough. Not for cases like this." As the sun climbed higher, the officers worked in a tense rhythm, taking soil samples, photographing boot prints, analyzing drag marks that suggested Lydia's body had been pulled from a vehicle to the base of the tree. A tire tread in the sand matched something wide, maybe a motorcycle or an off-road bike. The desert was too dry to preserve it perfectly, but there was enough to follow. One of the techs held up a small item found near the roots, the torn strap of a handbag. Another found strands of blonde hair caught in the bark. Detective Keene exhaled slowly. She didn't walk here. Someone brought her. And with that realization, the direction of the case changed entirely. No one said it out loud, not at first, but everyone understood. A young woman didn't end up like this by accident. Someone had taken her. Someone had harmed her. And someone had come back to bury her where they thought no one would ever find her. But they were wrong. The desert had given Lydia back. And now the investigation truly began. When a case like Lydia Monroe's breaks across the news, people tend to focus on the ending, the discovery, the suspect, the trial. But the truth is that stories like this don't start in the desert. They start long before anyone realizes something is wrong, in the quiet corners of everyday life. And to understand what happened to Lydia, you have to understand who she was before Copper Ridge Desert ever swallowed her name. Lydia grew up in Bridgetown, Ohio, a town small enough that people joked you could walk from one end to the other before a cup of coffee cooled. She was born into a family that worked hard, lived simply, and didn't expect much from life other than keeping the bills paid and the porch light working. Her father, Franklin Monroe, drove school buses for nearly 20 years. Her mother, Elaine, worked double shifts at a roadside diner on Route 32. From the time she was a kid, Lydia had a softness about her. Not weakness, but something like openness. A willingness to see the best in people first, even when they didn't always deserve it. Teachers described her as gentle, observant, and quietly ambitious. Not the kind of ambition that gets printed in school yearbooks. She wasn't planning on becoming a doctor or a lawyer, but the private kind, tucked away behind her shy smile. She wanted a life bigger than Bridgetown. She wanted to learn what existed beyond cornfields, factory lots, and the same two coffee shops. Her family didn't understand that at first. Bridgetown was the kind of place where leaving wasn't considered success. It was considered strange, unnecessary. But Lydia kept her dreams to herself until she was old enough to act on them. After high school, she enrolled in a cosmetology program. She liked working with people, liked helping them feel transformed even in small ways. But tuition, supplies, rent, textbooks, everything stacked up faster than she could manage. By her second year, the pressure became too much. She dropped out quietly, promising herself she would go back one day when her life felt a little more stable. She never did. Instead, she started taking seasonal jobs, resort hostess, front desk clerk, event server, jobs that came with long hours, unpredictable schedules, but the one thing she valued most, travel. Lydia never had the money to take vacations, but she didn't have to. The jobs did that for her. Florida in the spring, Colorado during ski season, California during festival months. And at every stop, she called her parents, always with the same soft excitement. "You won't believe the view from the beach today. I never thought I'd see mountains like this. I know it's hard, but I'm getting closer to what I want." No one ever doubted that she meant it. Through everything, Lydia stayed close to one person, Cole Harrison. Cole had been part of her life since they were teenagers, not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in a real, worn-in way. They met in 10th grade biology class, partners for a semester-long lab assignment that neither of them took particularly seriously. They dated on and off through high school, broke up during her first year of cosmetology school, got back together when she moved home, and broke up again briefly when she left for a resort job in Florida. But every time Lydia returned, Cole was there, not waiting for her exactly, but steady. He worked long shifts, fixing HVAC units and electrical systems, helping his uncle's repair business. He didn't share her need to leave Bridgetown, but he understood it enough to know she would never stop wanting more. The turning point came early in 2024 when Lydia returned from a 6-month job in Colorado, feeling more certain of herself than ever before. She told Cole she wanted to settle somewhere warm, lively, and full of opportunity. Not permanently, nothing about her life felt permanent, but long enough to build something real, a savings account, a sense of stability, a life she didn't have to abandon every few months. Cole had been saving too, quietly, methodically, enough to cover a move, a deposit, and the first few months of rent. He showed her the numbers one afternoon while they sat on the tailgate of his truck behind a gas station. "I don't want to hold you back," he told her, "but if you're going to build something, I want to try building it with you." And that was how Sage Valley entered their lives. A tourist hub near the Nevada deserts, just big enough to feel electric, but not big enough to drown you. Lydia got hired quickly at Silver Lantern Resort, a 5-star property with marble floors, rooftop lounges, and enough tips to keep her motivated. Cole got a job in the resort's maintenance department, working late nights and early mornings, repairing whatever the guests or the desert heat broke. For the first few weeks, everything seemed to be falling into place. Their apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, affordable, and close to work. They had routines: coffee before sunrise, shared meals in the middle of overlapping shifts, little walks on the strip of street where vendors sold handmade jewelry and desert trinkets. But Lydia's schedule changed fast. Tourism season was peaking. Her new manager demanded longer hours. She often came home exhausted, sunburned, and missing entire meals. The work was harder than she expected. The people, especially intoxicated tourists, were unpredictable, and the desert heat made every mistake feel twice as heavy. Cole noticed first, not the exhaustion. Lydia had been tired before, but the stress, the kind she didn't talk about, the kind that formed quiet shadows under her eyes. She brushed it off, insisting she was fine, that it was just the adjustment period, that every new job came with a rough curve. Still, she didn't eat enough, didn't rest enough, and she trusted people too easily. That was the thing Cole worried about most. Lydia didn't see danger the way other people did. She always believed her kindness could soften things around her, and in a place like Sage Valley, that kind of belief could be dangerous. The night before she disappeared, Cole remembered the way she kissed him before leaving for work. Quick, distracted, already far away in her mind. She'd burned her hand earlier that week on a tray in the kitchen, but insisted she was fine. She didn't like showing pain. She didn't like burdening anyone. He remembered her smile as she grabbed her resort uniform, as if trying to convince him, or maybe herself, that everything was okay. He remembered her voice later that night, in their last call, and he remembered what she said. "Can you come get me? I don't feel safe." Those were the words that would echo in his head for weeks, the words that still echoed while detectives walked him through the evidence, the timeline, and the final hours of Lydia Monroe's life. By the time her body was found, the version of Lydia the world saw on missing posters, the bright smile, the neatly brushed hair, the soft brown eyes, had already become more memory than reality. But that wasn't who she really was. Lydia wasn't just the girl in the poster. She was the girl who wanted more, the girl who believed good people still existed, the girl who worked hard for a life she thought she was finally close to reaching. And someone had taken that from her. Part 1 had shown us the discovery. Part 2 shows us who Lydia was. But Part 3, the night she vanished, will show us how everything unraveled. By the time the sun set on August 9th, 2024, the temperature in Sage Valley had barely dipped below 100 degrees, and the heat clung to the air like something alive. People rushed in and out of air-conditioned casinos, bars, and storefronts, trying to pretend the desert didn't rule this town. But out on the edges of the resort district, where neon lights faded into dim parking lots and service alleys, the night felt different, thinner, more exposed. And that was where Lydia Monroe stepped out after her shift, carrying nothing but her phone, her small purse, and the exhaustion of a day that had worn her down more than she realized. She clocked out at 9:07 p.m., rubbing the bandaged burn on her left hand. A co-worker joked that she needed a vacation already. Lydia laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She told another hostess she was going to grab a drink while waiting for her boyfriend Cole Harrison to finish his shift. It wasn't unusual, not for someone who'd been spending the last few weeks juggling double shifts, difficult guests, and the pressure of starting over in a new city. Outside the Silver Lantern Resort, the desert wind hit her like a wave, dry and heavy. She cut across the parking lot toward Trail Mart 24/7, the small convenience store that sat between the resort and a half-abandoned motel. The pavement glowed faintly under the parking lot lamps, and for a moment she felt the ache in her legs ease. She told herself it was only one drink, something small to take the edge off. At 9:14 p.m., Lydia pushed open the door to Trail Mart. The cool air washed over her, carrying the faint smell of cleaning supplies and microwaved burritos. The cashier recognized her. She'd been coming here during her breaks, always grabbing the same brands, always smiling politely. "Long day?" he asked. Lydia nodded. "Something like that." She picked up a small bottle of white wine, a pack of crackers, and stood near the window while scrolling through her phone. At 9:23, she texted Cole, "I'm at Trail Mart. Take your time." But Cole wasn't taking his time. He was on the other side of the resort repairing a ventilation unit that had broken down mid-evening. He texted back a few minutes later to ask if she'd eaten. She answered honestly, "Not really. I'll snack on something." What neither of them knew was that, outside the store, a group of 5 men had just come from a weeknight gathering in the motel lot. Dorian Vega, Luis Ferra, Marco Bellido, Elias Contreras, and Jairo Mendez. To most people, they were just seasonal workers drifting between construction sites and night shifts, men who lived on cash payments and temporary jobs. But they stuck together, moved in a loose pack, often seen late at night in the less polished corners of town. At 9:40, the store's security camera caught Vega looking through the glass at Lydia. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't talking. Just watching. Then he nodded to his friends, and they walked inside. Lydia didn't notice them at first. She was tapping out another message to Cole, something simple, something about finishing her snack before he got off work. The men walked around her, seemingly casual, pretending to browse. But the camera picked up the glances, one after another, prolonged, focused. By 9:53, they approached her. Vega said something first. The audio didn't pick it up, but his body language suggested friendliness, or at least the performance of it. Lydia looked uncomfortable, but not threatened. She'd always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. That was who she was. The cashier later recalled hearing them offer her drinks, insisting she relax, that they were just talking. She didn't drink much, just enough to loosen her steps, enough for her to lose the edge of caution she normally kept around strangers. Outside the store, the air had cooled just slightly. Streetlights flickered on, and one by one the men followed Lydia out, like shadows slipping behind her. At 10:02, she texted Cole again, "I'm fine. Just hanging out near the store." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. A few minutes later came the first message that suggested something was wrong. There are some guys here. I don't know. It feels weird. Cole didn't panic right away. Sage Valley could be unpredictable, sure, but Lydia was smart, careful, until she wasn't. He typed, "Go inside. I'll come soon." At 10:17 p.m., Lydia called him. Her voice sounded tight, the kind of tightness you hear when someone is trying not to panic. "Can you come get me?" she asked. "I don't feel safe." Cole would later replay that sentence 1,000 times. He told her he needed 20 minutes, maybe less. She said okay. She said she'd wait, but she didn't. Because at 10:24, the camera outside Trail Mart recorded the moment everything changed. Lydia, slightly unsteady, climbing onto the back of Dorian Vega's motorcycle. Vega adjusting his jacket, glancing over his shoulder, the others watching, splitting off in different directions as if choreographed. The motorcycle rolled forward, turned left onto a poorly lit road, and disappeared toward the outskirts of Sage Valley. The sound of the engine faded within seconds. 3 minutes later, Cole's phone buzzed again, this time with a location pin. Then another, and another. 3 locations, 3 different stops, each one closer to the edge of the desert. Cole tried calling her. No answer. He texted. No response. By 10:41, her phone stopped transmitting entirely. By 10:58, Cole's shift ended early. When he begged his supervisor to let him leave, he sped through the resort district, heart pounding, hoping the pin she'd sent meant something simple. A miscommunication, a misunderstanding, maybe even a glitch. But when he pulled up to their apartment and found the door dark, quiet, untouched, he knew something was wrong in a way that carved into his bones. At 1:12 a.m., unable to reach her, unable to sit still, unable to reason away the dread filling his chest, he called the Sage Valley Police Department and reported Lydia Monroe missing. He didn't know that by then she was already gone. He didn't know about the tire tracks in the desert, or the drag marks, or the cottonwood tree where Avery Collins would find the black plastic bag 6 days later. He didn't know that the man she had left with, the man he'd never met, was someone whose name had already crossed police records more than once. All he knew was that Lydia had reached out to him with the last moments of her fear, and he hadn't been able to get there in time. Part 3 closed the door on what happened before the disappearance. Part 4, the investigation, will show how detectives began piecing together the truth, step by step, from the moment Cole made that call. The call came in at 1:12 a.m., the kind of hour when the night is silent enough that everything feels heavier. Officer Neil Rucker was on duty at the Sage Valley Police Department when Cole Harrison, voice shaky and breathless, reported his girlfriend missing. At first it sounded like one more domestic panic, a late-night misunderstanding, a couple arguing, someone storming off, someone not answering their phone. It happened more often than anyone liked to admit. But there was something different in Cole's voice, something tighter, something rawer. He told them about the texts, about the call, about the 3 location pins sent in less than 3 minutes. The officers wrote everything down, but even then they didn't understand the full weight of it. Not until Cole repeated one sentence, the last thing Lydia had said to him. "I don't feel safe." Those words turn a missing persons case into something else entirely. Within the hour, detectives were notified, and by sunrise, The Sage Valley PD had officially opened a high-priority investigation into the disappearance of Lydia Monroe. Detective Miriam Keene takes the lead. Detective Miriam Keene arrived at Lydia and Cole's apartment a little after 5:20 a.m. She moved through the living room quietly, taking in the details. The coffee mug on the counter, the half-folded laundry on the couch, the sandals missing from their place by the door. A life interrupted, a routine broken by something that didn't belong. Cole sat at the kitchen table, hands buried in his hair, barely able to breathe. He told her everything he knew, the shift schedules, the call, the messages that grew more fragmented, the 3 pins that made no sense on a map. Keene listened with steady patience. This wasn't her first missing person investigation, but she knew early on that this one was different. Lydia hadn't run away. She hadn't gone out drinking with coworkers. She hadn't slipped somewhere or lost her phone. Nothing about her behavior in the hours before her disappearance fit the pattern she'd seen before. When Cole finished speaking, Keene asked him a single question. Has she ever done anything like this? He shook his head instantly. Never. That was all Keene needed to hear. The first lead, trail mark, 24/7, the first tangible thread came from the last place Lydia had been seen. Trail marked 24/7. By 6:40 a.m., 2 detectives arrived at the store and requested the surveillance footage from the previous night. The cashier was still on shift, rubbing sleep out of his eyes, unaware that he had been the last person to see Lydia alone. He remembered her clearly. She looked tired, he said, like she just needed a minute to breathe. Then he mentioned something else. The 5 men who came in after her, men he had never seen together before, men who stood too close, men who lingered even after they'd bought nothing. By 7:10, detectives began reviewing the footage. What they found changed everything. There she was, Lydia, near the front window, sipping from a small bottle of wine. She looked a little pale, a little worn down but alert. Then the camera caught the moment the men entered. They didn't approach immediately. They circled her first, like they were gauging the situation, reading her body language. Then they moved closer. Detective Keene watched as Dorian Vega, identifiable from his DMV photograph and his arrest records, engaged Lydia in conversation. At first, she laughed politely, but the longer they talked, the more she shifted uncomfortably. The camera had no audio, but her gestures said enough. She wasn't relaxed, she wasn't fully at ease, and at one point she looked toward the door as if considering leaving. But she didn't. At 10:24 p.m., the footage showed Dorian leading Lydia outside. Then came the detail that hit the detectives hardest. Lydia hesitated before climbing onto the back of his motorcycle, a moment of pause, a flicker of uncertainty. But then she sat down and held onto the sidebar. One small decision that changed the course of the entire case. Mapping the pings, Detective Keene took the 3 location pins Lydia sent to Cole and mapped them out. They formed a rough arc leading southeast, away from town, away from hotels and restaurants, away from everything except miles of empty land and the desert's edge. The first pin was just 2 blocks from Trail Mart. The second rested near a small abandoned service station. The third, and final, was close to the junction leading straight toward Copper Ridge Desert. The locations were too far apart for someone on foot, the timing too fast for anything but a vehicle, and the direction told Keene everything she needed to know. Lydia hadn't been taken toward homes or businesses. She was taken somewhere empty, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would look. Tracking the men with the footage and identification, the police issued bolo alerts for the 5 men. 3 were found within hours: Luis Ferra, Marco Bellido, and Jairo Mendez, all living in a rundown unit behind the old motel. They looked startled, but not surprised when officers knocked on their door. The interviews didn't start well. "We didn't do anything. She got on the bike herself. We tried to help her. She was drunk." Detectives could tell immediately the men were coordinating their story. Too similar, too practiced, too clean for a spontaneous answer. But one detail stood out. 2 of the men had visible scratches. Luis had fresh welts on his arms. Marco had a long scratch across the bridge of his nose. They claimed it came from a metal fence and a fall. Keene didn't believe them. The apartment of Dorian Vega. It took until late afternoon to locate Dorian Vega, the man on the motorcycle. Officers found him in a cramped apartment that smelled of cigarette smoke and sweat. He opened the door shirtless, startled, with hurried breathing, like someone who'd been pacing. Inside, detectives noticed details almost immediately. A black motorcycle jacket tossed on the floor, a laundry basket filled with dirty clothes, an unmade bed, a laptop open on the kitchen table, and a phone plugged in beside it. Vega insisted he didn't know where Lydia was. "She left after I dropped her off," he said. "I didn't do anything." But his story didn't match the footage, and it didn't match the timeline, and it certainly didn't match the anxiety radiating from every inch of his apartment. Keene requested a full search warrant, and once it was granted, her team entered and began documenting. What they found wasn't enough to convict, not yet, but it was enough to confirm suspicions. A blouse that matched descriptions of Lydia's work attire, stains that would later be DNA tested, blonde strands of hair caught on a hoodie, and motorcycle tire marks in the dirt lot behind the building. Each piece of evidence was small, but together they formed a shape, and that shape was dark. The desert clue. Late that night, after reviewing all available information, Keene stood over the map of Sage Valley. Her fingers traced the 3 pins Lydia had sent. Her eyes narrowed on the direction of the 3rd pin, toward the desert, toward isolation, toward the place where 6 days later the truth would emerge from beneath a pile of branches. But on that first night of the investigation, the desert was just a suspicion, an ugly possibility she wasn't ready to say out loud. Not yet. But she felt it. The desert was calling, and whatever had happened to Lydia Monroe was out there waiting to be found. By the morning after Lydia Monroe's disappearance, Sage Valley PD had moved from confusion to urgency. The surveillance footage from Trail Mart 24/7 had transformed the investigation from a missing person inquiry into something far darker. And the moment detectives identified Dorian Vega on that grainy screen, things began shifting quickly. Detective Miriam Keene stood in the precinct's interview hallway, arms crossed, watching officers escort 3 of the 5 men into separate rooms. Luis Ferra, Marco Bellido, and Jairo Mendez looked exhausted, irritable, and confused, whether from guilt or lack of sleep, she couldn't yet tell. Their clothes were wrinkled, their hair uncombed, and each carried the stale scent of cigarette smoke and desert dust. They weren't under arrest, not yet, but they weren't free to leave either. The next 12 hours would determine which direction the case went. The first interrogation, Luis Ferra Detective Keene began with Luis, the man who appeared in the background of the footage, lingering near the store entrance. Luis sat slouched in the metal chair, arms folded, tapping his foot in an anxious rhythm. "Luis," Keene began calmly, "we're trying to understand what happened last night. We know you were with Lydia Monroe and the others at Trail Mart. Tell me what you saw." Luis shrugged. "There's nothing to tell. She was drunk. We were just trying to help her. She wanted company." "Did she?" Keene asked. "Because the footage doesn't suggest she was with you by choice." He shifted in his chair, eyes darting toward the mirror, the one he assumed was a window. "She wasn't scared," he insisted. "Why would she get on Dorian's bike if she was scared?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Keene said. "But the scratches on your arm, Luis, those didn't come from nowhere." He froze. "You want me to believe," she continued, "that you've got fresh claw marks on your forearm because of a fall?" Luis suddenly stiffened, his breathing shallower. "Look, I don't know what Dorian did, okay? I don't know anything." "Did something happen that night?" Keene asked quietly. Luis swallowed. Something flickered in his eyes, fear, guilt, or the memory of something too awful to say. But then he locked back up, visibly shutting down. "I already told you everything." Keene knew a wall when she saw one. She moved on. The second interrogation, Marco Bellido. Marco was different, nervous, fidgety. The scratch across his nose was impossible to ignore, a red, irritated line that still looked fresh. When Keene entered the room, he was already talking to himself, muttering, rubbing his temples. "Rough night, Marco?" she asked. He laughed weakly. "I guess. You want to tell me how you got that scratch on your face?" Marco stiffened. "Offense. I told the officers." "Funny thing," Keene said, sliding a photo across the table. "There's no fence outside Trail Mart." Marco blinked. "And the footage shows you there the whole time." He rubbed his hands together anxiously. "I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the store. I don't remember." "That's the problem," Keene said. "All your friends don't remember. But Lydia's missing, and none of you seem concerned." Marco's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything to her." "Then tell me who did." But Marco didn't answer. He pressed his palms to his forehead and stayed silent. Whatever he knew, he wasn't ready to share it. Not yet. The third interrogation, Jairo Mendez. Jairo was the quiet one, thin, tired, and hunched over like he'd been carrying too much weight too long. He didn't make eye contact when Keene sat across from him. "You were there, Jairo," she said softly. "You saw what happened." Jairo shook his head lightly. "I don't know what you want. We didn't touch her. Dorian said he'd drive her home, that's it." "Why didn't any of you follow them? Make sure she got there safely?" He shrugged without confidence. "Not my business." "Someone's life is everyone's business," Keene said. "Especially when you're the last people she was seen alive with." "At the store," Jairo murmured. "That's the last time I saw her?" But his voice had a tremor, tiny, but real. Keene left the room with another puzzle piece she couldn't yet place. The search warrant arrives. While the interrogations played out, forensic teams scoured Dorian Vega's apartment. The warrant, approved just before noon, allowed detectives to search everything: closets, drawers, digital devices, clothing, and the dirt lot behind the complex. And almost immediately, they found things they couldn't ignore: a black hoodie with blonde hair tangled in the fibers, a blouse matching the color Lydia had worn during her shift, a pair of jeans with reddish-brown stains, a torn bracelet, not confirmed to be Lydia's, but it matched the style she often wore. Nothing alone was conclusive. Together, they formed the beginnings of a story. And it wasn't a story in Dorian's favor. Outside, forensic techs knelt near the tire tracks found in the gravel behind the building. The marks were faint, but distinct enough to confirm they belonged to the same motorcycle seen in the trail mart footage. Now the question wasn't if Lydia had been in this area. It was how long she had been there, and what had happened before she left. The hunt for Dorian Vega. By early evening, 3 suspects had been questioned, but the most important one, Dorian Vega, was still missing. He wasn't answering his phone, he wasn't at his apartment, he wasn't at the job site his foreman claimed he worked at, and his motorcycle was nowhere to be found. That was when Detective Keene began to feel the familiar pull of urgency tighten around her. She'd worked enough cases like this to know when the one person tied closest to the victim disappears, it's never a coincidence. A bulletin went out across the county. Officers combed the outskirts of town. Roadblocks were established at the 2 main highways leading out of Sage Valley. At 7:13 p.m., a patrol unit located Vega's motorcycle parked behind an abandoned mechanic shop near the far side of town. The engine was cool. Dust settled on the seat. It had been there for hours. But Vega wasn't inside the building. He wasn't anywhere. A cold certainty settled over Keene. He was running. A laptop, a phone, and a search history. No one wanted to see back at the precinct. Vega's seized phone and laptop were being processed by digital forensics. By late evening, the first results began coming in. The search history was a punch to the chest. How to wipe a phone completely. How to confuse a GPS signal. Can police track deleted data? Best way to hide something in desert climate? How long until fingerprints disappear? The room fell silent as the investigators read the entries aloud. There was no more ambiguity, no more benefit of the doubt, no more pretending this was a misunderstanding. Whatever happened to Lydia wasn't an accident. Someone tried to cover their tracks, someone planned, someone prepared to vanish, and that someone was now missing. Cole Harrison breaks down the timeline. Detective Keene met Cole in the hallway near the evidence lab. His face looked hollow, dark circles, dry lips, blank stare. She had him walk through the final messages again. The timestamps, the tone of Lydia's voice, the gaps between replies. Cole's hand shook as he spoke. "I should have gone faster," he said. "I should have left earlier." Keene put a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your fault." But Cole wasn't listening. He was replaying the last call over and over, trying to find something he could change. "She said she wasn't safe," he whispered, "and I wasn't there." Keene knew the look in his eyes. She'd seen it in fathers and mothers and spouses and friends. The guilt of surviving, of missing the unmissable, of not being able to stop what was already in motion. But she needed him steady, because the next part of the investigation depended on him. The breakthrough around midnight. An officer rushed into Keene's office with a piece of evidence no one expected, and one that would change the case's path forever. A witness had come forward, a landscaping worker from a nearby property. He recognized Vega in a photo. He'd seen him earlier that week, carrying something near the desert, something wrapped in a tarp, something heavy. And suddenly, everything began pointing in one direction, toward the same place Lydia's final location pin had indicated, toward Copper Ridge Desert, toward the truth waiting beneath a tree. The desert looks different when you're searching for someone you know you might not find alive. It moves differently. It breathes differently. Even the silence feels sharper, like it's holding something back. By the time the search for Lydia Monroe expanded into the vast emptiness of Copper Ridge Desert, detectives were no longer treating this as a missing person case, not after the footage, not after the interrogations, and definitely not after the search history found on Dorian Vega's laptop. Detective Miriam Keene stood beside her unmarked SUV at the edge of the dirt road as the first waves of volunteers and officers began gathering. The early morning sun had barely touched the horizon, but the heat already pulsed across the landscape in slow, steady waves. The desert stretched out in front of them, a wide expanse of burnt orange soil, scattered sagebrush, and distant rock formations that looked like they didn't belong on Earth. 5 location points had formed a pattern, one from the convenience store, 2 from the abandoned service station, and the last from a nearly unmarked stretch of road curving toward the open desert. That final pin was the one that haunted Cole, and the one that pulled the investigation deeper into the wilderness. Keene knelt beside a map spread across the hood of her SUV. Red circles marked every coordinate connected to Lydia's last transmissions. 3 deputies hovered beside her, waiting for instructions. "The signal cut here," Keene said, tapping the 3rd marker. "But the tech team says her phone stopped completely within a 1-mile radius of this location. That means the phone didn't run out of battery, someone turned it off, or destroyed it." "And we're searching the whole radius?" one deputy asked, squinting at the harsh sunlight. "We have to." Copper Ridge had a reputation, not the kind tourists heard about, but the kind law enforcement carried like a superstition. Too wide, too empty, too easy to lose things in. People, objects, secrets. A black SUV rolled up beside the detectives, dust swirling around it. Cole stepped out, his face pale and his eyes hollow. He hadn't slept since the night Lydia disappeared, and even if someone told him to, he wouldn't have been able to. Keene approached him gently. "Cole, I know you want to be here, but you can't join the search today." He shook his head. "I'm not staying behind while she's out there." "It's protocol," Keene replied, her voice steady but sympathetic. "We have tracking teams, volunteers, drones. I can't run a coordinated field search with someone emotionally compromised. It puts everyone at risk." Cole clenched his jaw, fists tightening at his sides. "She's my girlfriend." "I know." He looked out toward the horizon, toward the place where her last signal died, and a single tear pushed its way out. He didn't bother hiding it. Keene rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. "If we find anything, you'll be the first to know. But right now, let us look." He nodded, reluctant but understanding. "Just find her." "We will," Keene said, "one way or another." The search begins. By 7:15 a.m., over 30 volunteers, officers, and 2 K-9 units were moving into formation, spacing themselves at nearly equal intervals. The sun climbed higher, painting the desert in bright, unforgiving light. The air shimmered. The ground cracked beneath every step. Avery Collins, the volunteer who would eventually discover Lydia's body 6 days later, joined silently. She walked with determination despite the heat, clutching the metal search rod used to prod through brush and sand. Searches like this often start quietly, voices low, steps measured, eyes scanning for anything that didn't belong, a scrap of fabric, a footprint, something dragged or buried. Keene kept her radio close to her ear as she followed the line of volunteers from a slight distance, scanning the terrain with binoculars. Every once in a while, she stopped to kneel beside a patch of disturbed soil or a broken sage branch, analyzing whether it meant anything or nothing at all. After an hour, one of the deputies called out, "Possible trace, east side." Keene jogged toward him, boots kicking up dust. The deputy pointed at a shallow indentation in the ground, something like a track. "Could be from a motorcycle," he said. Keene crouched low. The groove was faint, half erased by the shifting sands, but it was consistent with narrow tires. She exhaled quietly. "Mark it," she said. "Photograph it. Then keep moving." It wasn't proof, but it was direction. Breaking the circle. By late morning, the heat grew harsher. A few volunteers had to step back, dizzy from the sun, but the rest kept pushing. A K9 unit barked suddenly, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the dry air like a siren. The dog pulled its handler toward a cluster of mesquite shrubs. Everyone froze. Keene moved quickly, weaving through the brush until she reached the officer, holding the leash. The dog kept sniffing, circling, whining at the same patch of ground. "What do you have?" she asked. "Not sure," the handler replied. "But something was here. Recently." Another officer swept the area with a metal detector. Nothing. A volunteer combed through soil with a search rod. Also nothing. But then the K9 dipped low, pawing at the earth with growing urgency. Keene dropped to her knees and brushed aside loose sand, and there, partially buried, covered in dust, was a small object, a phone case, slim, light, covered in scratches. Her breath caught. "Get a bag," she ordered. The phone itself wasn't there, but the case was unmistakable. Burgundy color, a small constellation sticker on the bottom corner. Cole had mentioned it during their first interview. That was Lydia's phone case. The desert had swallowed the device, but it hadn't hidden the evidence completely. Keene stood, the case sealed in an evidence bag now held carefully in her hands. She stared across the endless landscape. Someone had been here. Someone had dropped this, and someone had kept moving. "Fan out another 100 yards," she said. "We're close." The break. For another 2 hours, the search continued with growing intensity. Volunteers scanned deeper into the desert, covering areas rarely visited by anyone. The heat grew almost unbearable, shimmering waves rising off the ground. Then, shortly after noon, a shout echoed across the plain. "Detective! Over here!" Keene's heart thudded as she rushed toward the voice. Volunteers were gathered near the base of a dying desert tree, old, twisted, its bark peeling in long strips. Something was off about the ground beneath it. The soil looked disturbed, mounded, like something had been moved or buried. Keene swallowed hard. "Start clearing the brush," she said quietly. Volunteers used gloved hands to pull away dead branches and dried clumps of grass. The desert smell grew stronger, harsher. Then the first layer of debris fell away, revealing a black sheen beneath. Plastic, a large bag. Her chest tightened. She knew what this meant. She knew what they had found. But protocol mattered. "Stop," she said firmly. "Everyone back. Scene needs to stay intact." She called the evidence team forward, voice steady, but softer now. They moved carefully, slowly, peeling away each layer until the entire bag lay exposed. The desert had finally given up its secret. Confirmation the body wouldn't be identified officially for hours, but Keene already knew. Everyone did. The line between hope and truth had finally snapped. They had found Lydia Monroe. And with that discovery, the investigation shifted again from search to justice, from possibility to certainty, from looking for answers to chasing the person who had tried so carefully to hide her. When investigators find a body, the world doesn't pause. It doesn't hush. It doesn't give anyone time to process. Everything accelerates. Everything sharpens. And the people working the case have to move twice as fast as the grief that's following behind them. By the afternoon of the day, Lydia Monroe's body was found in Copper Ridge Desert. The crime scene had transformed from a quiet patch of sand into a full-scale forensic operation. Yellow tape fluttered against the dry wind. Markers dotted the ground like scattered seeds. Forensics vans lined the dirt road. The sun overhead burned without mercy, but no one stopped working. Detective Miriam Keene stood at the perimeter, her eyes fixed on the black plastic bag being carefully lifted by two forensic examiners. Every movement was slow, deliberate. The desert didn't allow for mistakes. One wrong step could erase a footprint or contaminate a crucial clue. Keene knew that. And still, watching the team work, she felt a heaviness settle over her shoulders, the weight of understanding that they were long past the point of saving Lydia. Now they were fighting for something else, the truth. A few feet away, Avery Collins stood with her arms wrapped tightly across her chest, staring at the tree where she'd found the bag. Her face was pale, her breath shaky. "You need a break," the deputy beside her said gently. But Avery shook her head. "No, I'm fine." Her voice didn't match her eyes. Keene approached her. "Avery, you've done more than enough. Go sit by the vehicles. Get some water." I didn't think it would be her," Avery whispered. "No one ever does," Keene said softly. Avery nodded, but her gaze stayed fixed on the spot where the bag had been. The first forensic signs. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment didn't happen at the morgue. It started right there in the desert. Keene watched as the M.E. lifted the bag open with practiced precision. No cameras, no public, no records beyond the official report. Just professionals facing the worst part of the job. The M.E. looked up at Keene for only a moment, a subtle nod confirming what everyone already suspected. "It's her," he said. Those two words hit harder than any scream could have. Keene exhaled slowly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What can you tell me?" "Not much yet," the M.E. replied. "But the body shows signs of long-term exposure to heat. Likely deceased for several days. No visible identifying marks left. The desert had stripped the truth down to its harshest form. We'll need the lab to confirm cause of death," he added. "But there are indications of a struggle." Keene didn't flinch. She knew what that meant, knew what the scratches on Luis and Marco's skin hinted at, knew what Lydia's panic-filled final messages foreshadowed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a disappearance gone wrong. This was a crime. Back at the station, the web tightens. By the time they returned to the precinct, dusk had begun settling over Sage Valley. Streetlights flickered to life in staggered rows, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. But inside the station, the air buzzed with energy. Officers moving quickly, phones ringing constantly, paperwork stacking higher by the hour. Detective Keene walked into the briefing room, where several officers waited for her update. She removed her jacket, dropped a stack of field notes on the table, and spoke with the calm clarity she was known for. Lydia Monroe was found deceased in Copper Ridge Desert, she began. The body appears to have been deliberately hidden. This is now officially a homicide investigation. The room went silent. And we have two priorities, she continued. First, analyze everything from the scene. Second, locate Dorian Vega. Still no trace of him? One sergeant asked. Not yet, but he's not invisible. He's hiding. Keene turned toward the evidence board. Photos of Lydia, the trail mark footage, the suspects, and the map of the desert were pinned up like fragments of a puzzle. She placed a new marker on the board, a photograph of the tree where Lydia had been found. Vega was seen in that area by a witness 3 days ago, she said, carrying something wrapped in a tarp. A murmur rippled across the room. Interrogating the remaining suspects, Keene didn't wait. She went straight to the interrogation rooms. First, Luis Ferra. She placed the photo of the desert tree in front of him. Luis's eyes widened. "You ever been here?" she asked. He shook his head instantly. "No, never." "So why did a witness see Vega near that same tree earlier this week? And why is Lydia Monroe dead under it?" Luis swallowed hard. His Adam's apple trembled. "I didn't know she was dead," he said. "How did you think missing persons cases end, Luis?" Keene asked. Luis looked down at his hands. He seemed younger suddenly, scared in a way he hadn't shown before. "I didn't hurt her," he whispered. "I swear I didn't." "But Vega did." Luis shut his mouth, tight, like someone had turned a key behind his lips. Keene leaned in. "If you keep protecting him, you go down with him." His silence said everything. Marco breaks. Marco Bellido cracked before the night was over. He wasn't built for pressure. He wasn't built for guilt. And he definitely wasn't built for a homicide investigation. When Keene returned to his interrogation room, he was shaking, his scratch-covered nose flushed red, his hands trembling against the tabletop. I didn't think she'd end up dead," he blurted out. Keene stayed steady. "Marco, this is your chance to be honest." He rubbed his face. "Vega said he'd take her home. He said she was fine. Did she look fine?" Marco shook his head, tears welling. "She looked scared." Keene felt a coldness settle beneath her ribs. "And you let her get on that bike anyway?" Marco didn't answer. She didn't need him to. The truth had already slipped out. The data tells its own story. While interrogations continued, the digital forensics team worked late into the night. Keene walked into the lab shortly after midnight. A technician waved her over, pointing at the glowing screen. "We recovered deleted data," he said, "from Vega's phone." Keene tensed. "What kind of data?" The tech clicked open a folder, images, screenshots, location logs. The last GPS point on Vega's device matched the exact area where Lydia was found. "Distance from the burial site, approximately 900 yards, the tech said. Keene exhaled. "That places him at the scene." "That's not all," the technician continued. "There's evidence he turned off Lydia's phone manually. We found system logs consistent with forced shutdown." Keene stared at the screen for a long moment. The pieces weren't just coming together. They were locking into place. Cole Learns the Truth Detective Keene found Cole Harrison in the quiet waiting area near the back of the precinct. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red from crying but now dry, as if the tears had given up on him. When she sat beside him, he didn't look up. "Cole," she said softly, "we found her." He nodded slowly. "I heard the radios. I already knew." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Keene placed a hand on the table between them. "We know who did this, and were closing in on him, but you need to prepare yourself. The next few days, they're going to be hard. Cole's jaw clenched. "Just get him," he whispered. "We will." Her voice held no doubt. The net closes. By dawn, a bolo had been issued statewide. Highway patrol units watched every exit route from Sage Valley. Greyhound stations, airports, bus bars. Vega wasn't just a suspect now. He was the only suspect. And the desert had already given investigators everything they needed to hunt him. Part 7 ends with the truth emerging, not fully, but enough to know the monster behind the crime. Part 8 will lead us to the chase, the arrest, and the final unraveling of Dorian Vega.